Goody, goody, here it comes.
Welcome to the Cinema Psycho Show.
You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
Oh my God, don't stop now!
With your hosts, Brian, John, and Elaine.
Welcome to Cinema Psychos. I'm your host, Brian Coddington, joined by my co-host, John and Elaine Wolscroft, and
Episode number deuce.
Number deuce.
Welcome one and all to the show that never ends.
It never ends.
Ever.
Well,
It's
maybe in
never
about an hour.
Podcast. Yeah. Never ends except for about the 60-minute mark.
After a while, it becomes a hostage situation, so we're not about that. I'm not about
Exactly.
that life.
So, yeah, congratulations. We made it number 2.
Yeah!
Number 2! And today we're going to be... You can make it number 2 every day. And today we're going to be talking about, since it's October, personally my favorite time of the year.
Sames.
We're going to be talking about horror movies and kind of why they suck nowadays. And specifically, we're going to be talking about Scream.
I think that's a nice kind of jumping off point of what ended one era of horror movies and kind of started another.
And made it shitty.
Yeah, well,
Well, that's why we're going to
get into that.
We'll
Get right into that. So I feel that that's kind of a good middle point. So we don't want to talk about Scream here. Basically, Elaine, do you want to kind of break down the general plot of Scream here?
Sure. So Scream is the story.
The story
of
A lovely lady.
No, it's not that story. It's the story of our main character, Sydney, who has recently lost her mother, and she lives in this town where all of a sudden this rash of murders has started. Because her mom was killed the year before, around about the year before,
raped and murdered.
Yeah, and so the whole
Double dose.
Wow, you just made a Fockers joke about rape and murder.
Double dose.
Good job. Okay. And the man I married, everyone. And but there's a series of murders that are happening in the town, and it parallels, what Sydney's already dealing with losing her mom, and then the fact that her classmates start to die.
So killing teenagers, that's kind of the big thing.
Basically, your typical slasher movie.
Yeah, a guy in a ghost face mask is calling people up, scaring the living hell out of them, and then
The killer is calling them first, and I mean.
So right off the bat, before we get too
scary
far,
movies, Sydney?
I'll got you like a fish.
Okay, your ghost
His
case
ghost face
filler.
is on point.
Surprise.
Yes.
So before we get too far into the movie, I think we should point out that by this point, the slasher genre was dead. It was a lot of direct-to-video kind of movies. And for better or worse, which we are clearly going to get into that conversation in vivid detail, this kind of revived it by kind of giving it more of a satirical meta awareness, in the sense that they talk about horror movies. These people in the film are fans of horror movies and films in general, and the movie's kind of wink in that sense. So it's a little bit of comedy, a little bit of horror, and it seemed to be that kind of time for kind of revitalizing it by pointing out all of the cliches and all the things that kind of go into
And self-reflection,
self-reflection is a good way to put it.
Really being aware.
Now, the irony of it is that a film that was kind of mocking all these tropes ended up bringing in a whole another era of movies that did exactly those things. So
And
it clearly didn't learn a
turned
thing.
to shit.
Because we do see that as a turning point. When Scream came out, that did open the gates for a lot of other films to start as well.
It's definitely true. I mean, for me, I kind of look at horror as continuing in a track where we were introduced to specific monsters that were basically ripoffs of literature. Okay, your classic literary monsters, your vampires, your Frankensteins, your mummies and things like that.
Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi.
Yes, and then we started to get remakes of those through the 50s, and then the 60s hit, and you had atomic monsters and things like that. But these were all original creations.
Well, they're also
to some degree
of their generation. Like you look at Godzilla, which is obviously from Japan, and just movies about giant octopuses and
right. And
whatever.
that's what I mean. Your atomic monster.
Yeah,
type
exactly.
stuff.
And I think that we should go a little more in detail on that. Obviously, it was a reflection of the Cold War, and the fear of the nuclear bomb. So horror movies, more than most movies, are usually a reflection of the time in which they are being made.
Correct. But my point is that you had somewhat original creations up until. I mean, I mentioned to you this a couple weeks ago, is that, in the same couple years before Scream, you had movies like Leprechaun, Tales from the Hood, these types of original monsters and original creations that, they may have borrowed elements from, say...
But is Leprechaun any good, though?
Okay, first Leprechaun is. Okay.
With Jennifer Aniston.
Jennifer Aniston in High Tops, okay? Yes.
It's not as good as Leprechaun in Space.
We don't need to talk about that.
Or Leprechaun Back in the Hood.
Oh, yes. Even Leprechaun 2 is not half bad either. That's when he's, got the casino gambling thing and, all that shit. But my point is that up until Scream hit, movies, specifically in horror, were somewhat original to some degree. They borrowed elements. Like you could easily say that all the slasher movies in the 80s borrowed from Halloween. Or even Halloween borrowed from Psycho.
Absolutely. So I think we should take a moment to say that Brian is vehemently against Scream.
I hate it.
Elaine, I think it's fair to say that you love Scream.
That's
and
fair.
I feel that I'm somewhere in between. So it's kind of nice that we have three different perspectives on this. But I have to say what you said there. I'm going to have to disagree with you a little on that one, Bob.
You going to give me a red card on that one?
Yeah, is that, if you look at the movies that came from Halloween, they are just direct rip-offs of Halloween. Not only in the sense of Friday the 13th, like following that same slasher teenage murder genre, but also, not only that, but the holidays. You had April Fool's Day.
That's a good movie.
It actually was all right. But the point is that, and then they made New Year's Eve, I think.
New Year's Evil.
New Year's Evil,
Yes.
correct. Silent Night, Deadly Night. So
that's a classic.
Yeah.
And then Silent Night, Deadly Night 2.
Not good.
Okay, but
that movie's
Silent Night, Deadly Night 2 with the Garbage Day meme.
You need so much
Garbage
tequila.
Day. Garbage Day. No.
Eyebrow acting at its finest. If you haven't seen it, oh boy, he's acting with those brows.
He really is.
You're in for
kind
a
of thing
treat.
that would give Keaton a wide on.
Treat.
But what you're saying is that they basically all borrowed from each other, and that Scream is no different.
Yes.
Now here's where I kind of see Scream as a different beast in the standpoint that, and when it comes to the business of Hollywood, okay, when Scream came out and became as big of a phenomenon as it became, it was a signal to Hollywood that now they can start using the same types of methodology that they would apply to, say, action movies and dramas and things like that, and start cranking these suckers out on a continual basis. Now, we had horror movies that were cranked out beforehand, but a lot of those were, they were themed to just October. October was the prime time to go ahead and get a horror movie out. And it still is to a degree, but I just see that Scream was the turning point where horror became extremely commercial.
Well, I mean, I think films in general at that point became extremely commercial. I don't necessarily think it was just limited to horror. I mean, we've talked about this before, where, the studios realized how much money they could make, and it did become less about an artist's vision as far as directing goes, or a studio puppeting a director into making what they wanted him to make. The irony is, when Scream came out, it had a very innovative script, and I'm never, ever going to say anything bad about Kevin Williamson because I love the dude. I mean, he was the writer on this, but it's funny because he turned right around and then he wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer, which has none of the self-reflexivity that Scream did and had none of the, the
he had
winking
George Lucas
humor.
Syndrome. He didn't even realize what he had made,
George Lucas
and then he goes
syndrome.
and shits on it. With,
I don't know that that's true. I don't know enough about the process there, but it is ironic that he made this movie Scream to totally make fun of the genre itself and to be aware in its own entity.
I don't know if making fun of it is the right term. I think it was
You don't think with every...
Well, something like, look at
Well, with
Spinal
Jamie-
Tap. Spinal Tap was not there to
Well, no, I mean, it
necessarily
wasn't Spinal
to mock
Tap.
or tease. I'm not saying it, and I'm not doing it's apples to oranges, but I'm saying that Spinal Tap was very kind of affectionate in its
Okay,
you know,
well, fine,
in its
then
mocking, and
to
I think so was Scream.
To smile at itself, then. I mean, you know, like...
There
not,
you go, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because, like, with Jamie Kennedy and his goddamn horror movie rules, like, come on.
I
that's
just
funny.
want, as the big horror person here, I just want to say that no actual real horror movie fan is like Jamie Kennedy.
I'm a big whore too.
You're a big horror?
Oh, horror! Oh, I'm
Horror.
sorry. I'm a random slut.
Yeah, but I just want to say none of us are like that.
Well, I mean, would hope that most of us strive to not be like Jamie Kennedy in any way. But come on, like, I mean, talking about, you know, being self-reflexive to laughing at themselves, you know, that scene at the very end of the movie where Jamie Kennedy's on the couch and Scream, he's watching Halloween, and the killer's coming up behind him,
Yeah.
and he says, Jamie, behind you, no. That's
around,
his
yeah.
name in the film isn't Jamie, but it's his real name is Jamie, and it's saying Jamie, look behind you, and the killer's behind him. Like, come on, like that was thoughtful, that was funny, you know,
Yeah.
because you're scared and you're laughing at the same time.
I'm not saying that, and I mean a lot of it can go towards out of the script, obviously, but even Wes Craven's direction. My problem with it is just that, not necessarily with Scream itself, but just the movies that followed in its wake. It was a turning point where horror started to become more so commercial. And yeah, it could be about just the films in general but I'm just seeing a track where horror became more about how much fucking money we can make, not necessarily about, am I making something original? Is it something that's has to wink and nudge to the audience that, oh yeah, this is what horror movies about. And I mean, yeah, and I know what you did last summer kind of followed in the footprints of Scream. But I mean, that led to, a continuation of movies in which it was all slasher movies for a while, and then we got Blair Witch, which honestly, I fucking hate that movie too.
But come on, you can't say that's not an original idea. You know, you said that they got less original.
I said that was
over time.
original marketing. I don't know.
It's original. That's original marketing. It's not an original idea.
Okay, fair point.
Okay,
Fair point.
that was using the internet at a time when
The
only
internet
people.
wasn't used.
Well, people were using it, but they were primarily using it for porn and for
And that's when you
AOL
clicked
Instant
on a
Messenger.
JPEG of
So
a boob, you had to wait for hours.
yes,
for
you
that
did.
photo to come
You
in,
had to wait at least a good 5 minutes.
That's how the dial-up generation really learned how to prolong
Patience.
their masturbation. It really helped them, get the time in.
That's the thing you just said. No,
Well,
right.
I feel like when you got your porn on your phone, like you're done in about 6 seconds. But we went for hours, like Sting.
The man I married, everyone. The man I married.
But my point is that it led to the horror movies that we have now, where honestly, unless you want something like a Paranormal Activity, like a Saw with the torture porn, which thankfully they're not doing a whole lot of that anymore. Even with like Hostel and those types of movies where the substance is gone out of it. And that's kind of the thing is I felt Scream, even though it had the wink and a nod to horror movie fans, it didn't have as much substance and necessarily originality as some of the movies that came before it. That's my point. Friday the 13th?
Friday the 13th. If you look at those movies, they made, depending on which ones you consider as canon, 8 to 10 of those movies, they made the same movie 10 times. And I think what they
did the same thing with A Nightmare on Elm Street as well.
Exactly.
The second Nightmare on Elm Street.
But my
is
point
oh,
is
God.
that they made the same movie over and over again because it cost them about $10 million to make, and it made $100 million. I'm sure those numbers aren't exactly right, but the idea is that they, about 5, 6,
They had a
7, 8
return on their
times,
investment.
the investments, and they didn't care if they made a quality movie, and they were just making the same movie over and over again.
Right.
So I feel that with horror movies, I think this is just par for the course.
And it's a shame because, I mean, sometimes when you do have, like, an original idea, because I think the first Hostel, kind of an original idea.
I hated
but when
the
you
first
make,
Hostel.
and I'm not saying it was good or bad, I'm just saying, when you
It's
come up with an
original idea, yes.
That's one thing, but then when you make 7 sequels, like, you've beaten it to death.
Yeah.
Especially with Saw. How many Saws are there?
I think there's 6.
There's a lot.
7, I think.
Were there
There's a
7
lot.
songs?
Yeah, I think, if it's Halloween, it must be Saw.
That was a tagline that they
Yeah.
used for a while.
And
And
that's
now,
not okay. You can't make fun of us for that.
Every year. They made one every year. that's hard to do. Like, if you care at all what
Well,
you're
that's
doing.
that's the thing. Is all
But
they're
I mean,
doing.
it's a different crew every single. You
I
know
mean,
what I mean,
it-
like it's different actors, different director. every
Not
time.
necessarily. I mean, not
Bell.
not different actors. They were starting to recycle actors because what they would do is they would start saying, "Oh, well, remember how you saw that person got killed in Saw 4? Well, here's the backstory of how they got killed in Saw 5." I mean, that
Carrie
stuff
Ellis's
just
Princess Bride checks right
Yes.
now. His residual checks. He's like, well, better go back and do another one.
Exactly.
He was in 6 or 12. I don't know which one he was.
So
in,
I mean,
but-
for me, maybe I'm expecting too much out of horror movies. Maybe that's my problem. Is that I'm holding them to a level that honestly they don't hold themselves to, and that could be my biggest problem. As a person who loves the genre and wants nothing more than for it to be as good as it possibly can, and that's why for me personally, I don't look towards what Hollywood can crap out to see where the future of horror is going. I'm now looking towards the independents, the people who are the fans like you and I, who actually give a shit and do take the time and maybe take a year or two to go ahead to bang out a script and then take another year to go film the thing and then another year to go edit the thing so that by the time they're done, they've got a well-crafted movie that is original. That's why movies like The Babadook and even the first Sinister, I liked Sinister. Purge, not so much. Used to like Purge. But then you watch it a second time, you're like, eh.
But then too, I mean, you see a bunch of them come out, and I think that's a big problem we've discussed in films before. You know, there has to be some level of the stakes being high in order for a movie to pay off correctly emotionally.
Right.
So if you make a bunch of movies where they all have the same premise, it's like, well, a bunch of people are going to die. It doesn't matter. Like, how can we stop it? It's just going to be another movie in a year and a half, you know?
Well, the key is you have to care about the characters, too.
And I think that's the problem with, like,
and
with-
characters
with-
are never developed.
what is it, with, like, genreification? Is that a thing? Like,
I
you
think
do-
I think there's definitely genreification.
when you over genre eyes, if that's a word, like a movie, because I mean, I've seen scary movies that weren't a horror film. You know what I mean?
Thrillers.
Yeah, and I guess that's what you would call like a thriller, or even like some dramas, like Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene. You saw that with me, John. Like
I've never seen that. What is that about?
So it's about
It's about
this.
4 M's.
It's about this girl who. Does she run away from home or does she get kidnapped? I can't remember.
She does run away. She ends up, because she has no money or
Yeah, and she
anything,
ends up with
in
a
a
cult.
Yeah.
And she, you know, all these like terrible things happen to her, and it's very frightening.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a horror movie, you know. But it was a great story,
Right.
and that's I think what like horror movies miss sometimes, because there is such an easy access to money through the horror genre.
It's true.
It gets lost, and the story doesn't become quite as good.
Well, how many truly great horror movies are there? There's, for every Rosemary's Baby, Exorcist, Night of the Living Dead.
Well, Exorcist is another movie that I hate because it's always
Really?
Well, here's my problem with The Exorcist is that everyone says that they love The Exorcist. It is so ubiquitous.
I love that movie.
I know, and I mean maybe it's kind of hard to explain, but I guess I look at other movies that existed around that time and can see where they might be somewhat superior to, say, The Exorcist. Personally, I love Rosemary's Baby, for example, which came out around the same
too.
time. Okay, I thought that was far more terrifying. Now, do I think that The Exorcist is shocking in certain areas? Absolutely, because audiences
Especially for its time.
in the
yeah.
70s were not used to seeing the type of graphic violence that movie showed.
Now we all masturbate with
Not-
crucifixes. Like, that's just like a thing now.
I mean, that's what we can thank The Exorcist for at the end of the day, right?
It is masturbating to crucifixes.
Sorry, as usual, I've stepped onto the wrong podcast.
You have to bring this over to your literary podcast,
Yes,
too.
yes.
You really
we-
do. Start talking about masturbating
We
to
haven't talked
crucifixes.
about masturbation yet. I
No,
appreciate
not
that.
yet. While talking about Babysitter's Club.
Excellent, excellent. That is coming new.
Chrissy's rolling the bean.
Christie's a really great idea.
Yeah. But, I mean, it isn't to say that I don't think Exorcist is a decent movie. I just don't see it as, like people always call it the scariest movie of all time. And that's kind of a very bold statement to make.
Horror
Because
and
what's
fear is
scary,
subjective.
well, exactly,
Yeah.
and that's my point. Is that what's scary to you, or scary to say the person who go ahead and who's say a Christian and would say, "Oh, well, yeah, that stuff is scary as shit," because of my personal beliefs. I don't necessarily find it scary.
Right.
But But too, I mean, you got to look at the context. I mean, at the time, that movie was frightening.
I mean, people were fainting.
Yeah, because I mean,
watching
now, like, it's like not that big of a deal, especially for like somebody even younger than us to see it. They'd be like, meh. But I mean, that movie was frightening for its time. I mean, you know, so many movies have to be taken in their own time context.
Well, I grew up in the '90s, so it's desensitized everything. The only movie that really actually ever gave me the creeps was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And
that's basically a snuff film, though.
Well, yeah, when I saw it, I was like 11 years old or so, and only really seeing a lot of mainstream Hollywood films I hadn't had access to.
But you see, that's a movie that...
Well, my point is that the movie was 16 millimeter, and I hadn't seen it like by 11 years old. A lot of 16 millimeter kind of movies, so it looked like...
But see, that
dirty.
right there is a movie that I would say is superior to The Exorcist. In how scary it is. One, because it's not saying, oh, there's a fucking demon that's going to go ahead and possess a kid. It's saying, no, you drive down the wrong back alley, you know, in Texas, and you're going to end up, you know, in a cannibalistic family massacre type deal.
And who hasn't gotten lost? I mean,
that's the point.
Relatable.
And honestly, fear really comes from reality. You know, if you're able to tap into the real fears that people have, then obviously,
they're onto us.
There's a police siren.
There's the police coming after us.
That's because you talked about masturbating
The
to
masturbation
crucifixes.
Police. That's who it is.
There you go.
I think you talk about piracy in the last episode. So they're coming after us. It's not a victimless crime, Brian.
Okay, maybe it's a crime for the the Hollywood studios, but I don't care about that.
But going back to our original film then, that we were talking about here,
Scream.
A lot of people did find Scream frightening. I wasn't one of them. You're clearly not one of them. But a lot of people were very frightened, especially with the opening scene.
The argument could be made that was scary. I mean, come on, like, you want to... I mean... Because I love this movie, so I mean, I'm biased, but man, the first time I saw this movie, I saw it in the theater, and like, when she's
Drew
talking
Barrymore.
to him and when Drew Barrymore's talking to him on the phone, and, you know, she's talking to him almost flirting, and then he's like...
I want to know who I'm looking at.
I mean, come on, like, I have chills right now hearing that. That was fucking scary. Like,
Well,
I mean, it was so good.
Well, I will give them this, okay? It is very ballsy to go ahead and kill off one of the biggest stars at the time.
Well, she was
because
actually
Drew Barrymore
cast as Sydney.
at the time, huh?
Or she wasn't cast, but they offered her the role of Sydney.
Correct.
And she said, no, I'd rather die in the beginning of it,
Yes.
so I can go back to just doing drugs.
But the key is,
all right.
No, she was clean by then.
But also, so she could say like, oh, if I die in the movie, then who's safe?
Well, that's the point, and that's where I will give
psycho stuff,
Scream credit is that they did do something that most movies would never do, and that's kill your, the biggest star in your movie. Because, I mean, Neve Campbell was known for Party of Five. Was she in Party of Five?
Yes, she was.
Okay.
And that was really popular.
And that was popular.
And Canadian.
She's well, you guys remember her beautiful episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
Dangerous Soup.
They filmed that in Canada, so of course there she was. Like,
you know what? She's really good in that, man. Like, she really is. Like, it's actually kind of funny.
But speaking of Wes Craven, he 2 years earlier had also done a meta-reflexive movie in Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
love that movie. Now that's the thing is I love that movie. Most people have said,
but similar in its style and take.
Correct. Most people have said that movie was basically the test for Scream. Mm-hmm. Like, people said that when he was making Wes Craven's New Nightmare, that was really a proto Scream. And I can understand that. And like, for me, as one, I'm a diehard Freddy Krueger fan. Okay, like he's one of my favorites in my pantheon.
Now, Nancy.
Yes, and honestly, Robert Englund is the only person who could go ahead and play Freddy Krueger, just like Doug Bradley.
Rorschach doing it.
No, fuck him. Okay, he's good as Rorschach. Okay, he was a good Rorschach, but he's no Freddy. Okay, he kind of looks like a fucking turtle. But I love Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and here's the thing: a lot of people who are Nightmare on Elm Street fans do not like Wes Craven's New Nightmare. They look at it as one of the weakest ones. That and Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Whereas,
bizarrely, I think The Final Nightmare is still better than Freddy's 2, Freddy's Revenge, or Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. But that's a whole
honestly, that's a whole other conversation on the merits of just ridiculousness. But But for me, New Nightmare represents, as you said, kind of within the world of the movie, knowing that the movie exists, making it self-aware. That part, yes, I will say, does work. But I don't know, something about Scream.
Well,
just,
it was self-awareness that took itself kind of seriously, and Scream was self-awareness that took itself on a camp level. That could have possibly.
And
been
that's,
part of it as well.
I think probably it is that they acknowledge that okay, the movie, in New Nightmare, that these movies have stopped, and that they were actually basically trying to hold back the real demon of Freddy Krueger, which is actually funny. Did you know that they filmed that as the earthquake in California happened?
Oh, wow.
Because those scenes where you see the parts of the road falling down from the earthquake, that was, I think it was Northridge, happened around that time that they were filming. Northridge earthquake. And that, they use it as a set.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
So, and like the earthquakes they were talking about, that was kind of reflective of what they were actually dealing with. But yeah, I think the camp part is what turns me off to Scream.
It's Kevin Williamson. I know you said you wouldn't say anything bad about him, and I mean the guy is clever, but he's basically the poor man's Joss Whedon, and he writes a lot of that dialogue where it's okay. Here's an actual piece of dialogue from Scream that really kind of stuck with me because I just recently watched this. Obviously,
I watched about 2/3 of it and fell asleep the other day. So
don't tell the audience that.
I just did. I've seen it enough times. I know the fucking plot.
So Billy, the boyfriend, who comes into Nev Campbell Sydney's bedroom through her window, very kind of shades of Nightmare on Elm Street with Johnny Depp there.
He kind of looks like Johnny
He does.
Depp.
I think they kind of cast him for that reason. But he's talking to her, and he was like, I just saw Exorcist on TV. They cut out all the good parts. He was a year ago, Sid.
You cut out all the good parts.
Yeah, our relationship was kind of like an R. Borderline NC-17. But lately, it feels like all the good stuff has been cut out for TV. And this is a line in the movie.
And that's like, early on in the movie.
Nobody talks like this except a screenwriter that thinks he's super clever.
But like, I mean, you said that before, but I mean, I don't think that it's apples to apples with him and Whedon, because like there's something very cerebral and very quippy about Whedon, whereas like Kevin Williamson like has very much like an eye to pop culture. But like there's also like a snarkiness, and like I feel like Williamson just like nails that 90s like ennui, you know what I mean, like that 90s like, oh, who cares,
Valley Girl bullshit.
I guess if you want, you know, like the whole
clueless
giving a
thing.
shit about anything.
Well, it drives me nuts about both of them, and while I feel this is going to be a very controversial statement, while I do like the Avengers, the first one, I don't think it's the be-all, end-all of superhero movies, and I think it's flawed. And one of the big flaws I have with it, just like with any Joss Whedon movie or Kevin Williamson movie, is all the characters are them. And they are incredibly smart and just full of pop culture wittiness. And it's just, I mean, you're writing yourself over and over again in every one of the characters.
Especially when all the characters are as smart as you are.
That was what kind of drove me nuts about Scream, is everybody is a film expert.
Yes, and that's a big problem for me, too, is, I mean, even Rose McGowan in the movie.
who would not show any signs of being a film buff or anything
no,
like that.
But she keeps bringing up movies.
Friend, yeah.
Yes, she's the ditzy friend who gets killed. But I just the lines of dialogue are a problem. They really are. It isn't necessarily how people talk. And I know they're doing it kind of like how Joss Whedon goes ahead and throws, quips in all the Avengers movies, and it turns me off personally to the movie. Now I will say it does do a couple things right. Okay, not every movie has its flaws, and even though I don't particularly care for Scream as a point when horror kind of went downhill for me, there are good things. I think it does a fantastic job of tension. Okay, with that opening scene, with any time when the ghost face is coming after him, after anybody, the tension with the music and the pacing is fantastic.
Which we can just give to Wes Craven for that.
That's all Wes Craven.
Absolutely.
Okay, the man is a master of raising tension.
But then Freddy got him in his dreams recently.
Oh, come on. Too
Oh,
soon.
that's too soon.
Way too
Hey,
soon.
that's not funny, guys. Wes Craven killed somebody. Too soon. Wait, no, that's not it.
No, I mean, that's not
That's not cool,
so
man.
not it. So
That
not
is
it.
not cool.
I do love Wes Craven,
But to that
apparently
point,
nothing's sacred.
But to that point, like with the dialogue, though, one thing I will say is it is really jarring when you see something like the Avengers and everyone talks like Joss Whedon, because they're all different people, they're all different superheroes, they all have very different backgrounds. I mean,
Ultron, I
some
call
of them,
Robot Whedon.
I mean, some of them are from like other planets, for Christ's sake. Yeah. One thing I will say is the fact that, Rose McGowan's character and, all the guys in the film and Jamie Kennedy and, that they all kind of speak in that, like, snappy, sarcastic kind of cadence. Like, their conversations have, like, a nice beat and a nice rhythm.
Except for Deputy Dewey.
And, well, I mean...
Doofy.
I mean, but what I'm going to say is, like, that makes sense, though, because the main high schoolers of the film, they're together every day. They're sharing a vernacular, that's generationally sound.
Yeah.
So it almost works in that sense.
But
where
they're
maybe
not all
they've
the
seen...
same kind of people. Like, you would understand if they were all, like, film, video store, like,
Clerks. Honestly, it reminds me of, like, Kevin Smith's Clerks.
And those two are very similar, and they're in the
Right.
same kind of... Like, these people all seem like they come from different backgrounds. Like, you have the really... hot, snarky girl. You have the I look like I'm going to snap at any second Billy. Like they
Right.
don't all like only Jamie Kennedy and his name is escaping me.
Matt Lillard?
Matt Lillard, thank you.
Yeah.
Like those two seem like the only ones that would be just throwing out movie lines and knowing who played.
Well,
like
that's
I said,
Matthew
I mean-
Lillard's whole career is,
Yeah.
his throwing out movie lines and his goofy
I like
antics.
Matt Lillard.
It's nice because he chews up so much scenery they don't have to break down after the movie's over.
But like, just to let me finish my point though. Originally,
Sorry.
Just because I wasn't done talking. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, I really wasn't done. But I'm saying like it is generational, and it is almost saying like teenagers speak their own language. They do speak to each other in pop culture references. I mean, to the degree that this is in the movie, like maybe not, but they have something common that they all draw from. And I think what they're trying to say is the world as we have it, like they're so blasé to it because they're like, oh, horror movies, this happened here, this happened there, like nothing phases me. Again, like it's that 90s trope of like, oh, whatever, it's fine,
As if.
Well, I think that the greater point here is, Brian, to your point about what Scream did, is possibly one of the more recent, ways that they've done this. But I think that this is just whenever there is a slam dunk of a horror movie, in one way or another, whether it's successful, whether it's good, or both, that they immediately copy it as many times as they can.
Absolutely.
Jaws is, I don't really consider it a horror movie. But
I
for
don't
its
consider
time-
Jaws a horror movie.
But for its time, I can see how
It was
people would see
frightening.
that as a horror movie. But then they immediately made Jaws sequels. They made a killer whale movie. So they just went and did, with Halloween, they did all the holiday horror
And now
movies.
we've got
This slasher movie.
Sharknado because of Jaws.
There you go. But I'm just saying that I think
Sharknado's a
Scream
gift.
was just,
Sharknado's a gift.
was a byproduct of what we've seen 100 times over, is one really good original idea and then just everybody copying it to a
Manufactured
lesser
over
degree,
and over and over
manufacturing,
again.
and then that dies down, and then something else comes along, like the Paranormal Activity movie. Say what you want about that, but that opened up that kind of found footage movie. kind of-
But that was
Yeah.
not Paranormal Activity that did that. It was Blair Witch.
But I would say that Blair Witch had been so many years before we had kind of forgotten about it. Paranormal Activity, I'm not saying it was the first time it's done, but it was the most recent time that it had been done successfully and kind of. So I feel that this is just something that continues to happen. And a lot, the studios look at horror movies as, pornography.
Pretty much they do.
keep the lowest common, because they also then appeal to the lowest common denominator, because they want stupid people to put their butts in seats and see a movie with no plot and people's getting their gonads.
Well,
ripped off
and honestly, that's speaking to a much larger, philosophical topic about horror and horror fans. The part of the problem, I've always said this, is that the horror fans that pay to see this shit, and that's honestly what it is. It's shit. They're responsible for them to continue to make this shit, because they only make what they think people want. Okay, they think that people, like right now, and I mean we talked about this the first episode, was they think right now that people all they want are superhero movies, And it's the same with horror. They think right now that all people want are Paranormal Activity, 10,000, and another Sinister, and another Insidious, and, the same bullshit over and over and over again. And the only people who are responsible for it, it's a shared responsibility. The producers, they see dollar signs, but they're only seeing dollar signs because the horror fans, and that's really who it is, are going out and seeing it. So I personally, I don't see many horror movies in theaters anymore. Just because I personally do not want to encourage them with my hard-earned money to keep making the same shit. If I see a movie come out and I'm like, you know what, I read some reviews and it's actually pretty good, then yeah, I will go ahead and I'll see it. But I actually see myself gravitating more towards independently made horror movies. Ones that, as I said, they're crafted with care for the most part. I mean, yeah, you do get some shitty ones out there that people are like, I'm just going to go make another zombie movie. And that happens. I mean, that zombie movies are a cash cow now. Because of Walking Dead, which I hate Walking Dead as well. But
fighting words.
Ooh,
those are fighting words.
Fired.
You big Walking Dead fan?
Oh, we love it.
He loves the
Okay.
Loves it, precious.
But my point is that horror fans that pay for this stuff are the prime troublemakers of why we keep having shit. I mean, if they stop paying for it, and honestly, it's the same thing with anything that we hate, like reality TV. I hate reality TV, and that's created because people keep viewing it. Mm-hmm. It's like drugs.
Lowest common denominator, baby.
Yeah, well, with anything, it appeals to the lowest common denominator. If you look at movies that win Academy Awards, they all come out within about a month and a half of each other.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the year is popcorn
Pretty much
movies
November and December.
Yeah, and dildo movies. That's basically
Dildo
it.
movies?
Ooh,
Dildo movies,
tell me more about dildo
What are these
movies.
dildo movies?
Oh,
you're
it's like when you
talking
took
about?
a vibrate and you jam it in your ear, and that's about what they're doing
It's
to
as
you.
pleasurable
with
as
these
the movie
movies.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's about the same exercise for your brain as these movies are giving you.
Dildo movies, who knew?
Dildo movies.
There's a YouTube series, Red Letter Media, that has a joke they call it "Fuck You, It's January."
That's awesome. I haven't heard
and that time of year where movies are just god awful. But I mean, I feel that's all year round. It's just around this time now we're getting all the Oscar buzz movies, and movies that are made with like care and they're thoughtful and they're intelligent.
Like the Steve
Provoking.
Jobs movie.
Yeah. So that's coming out. I mean, hopefully. I mean, I saw the one with Ashton Kutcher and that wasn't too great. So maybe
I
this
kept
one will be
waiting for the
better.
movie to start. The movie was almost over, and I was like, when is this shit going to pick up? Like, I'm not joking. I was like, when is the movie actually going to begin? And I was like, wait, what? The credits?
He
It's
punked
over?
you.
Yeah,
Punked
right?
you.
Ashton!
But
Yeah. But no, that's just my theory about
Yeah, I mean-
horror movies, that it's made because of the fans.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that we do have differing opinions on Scream itself, but I do think that there was a change in the wave of everything, after Scream came out, because it was like a resurgence of interest in not just slasher films, but I think in the horror genre, people realized again, like, it is fun to be scared.
Yeah, it definitely pushed the genre forward. I'm not going to say it didn't push the genre forward. For me, it pushed it in a direction that I don't think it necessarily has recovered from. It pushed it in a direction where the primary point of making the movie was not necessarily to make a good horror movie. It was, let's go ahead and make something that is primarily commercial.
Now, see, I think you're describing I Know What You Did Last Summer, though, and not Scream.
Because I look, Scream made
last summer, I think, is
movies
the
like I Know What You Did Last Summer possible.
I suppose, but I mean, I just think that that Scream is at a higher level, and I Know What You Did Last Summer was for the dumb people. And I think that's what we should blame. Like, blame Jennifer Love
And
Hewitt. Don't blame
what
Nev
would you say
Campbell.
I Know What You Did Last Summer 2 is for?
Really, really dumb people.
Really,
who
really dumb people?
I Know
Who
What You
like to
Did
hurt themselves.
last summer too. Electric Boogaloo.
No, I Know What You Did Last Summer.
I still know what you did last summer.
This one's on a beach.
The sequel trope. You got to put it in an exotic,
Yes.
paradise.
This one's on a beach. But I mean, I think that
Beetlejuice too. Beetlejuice goes Hawaiian. It's scrapped.
the movie we almost
unfortunately.
had and deserved, damn it.
Well,
Never
they're going to
thought.
make it Beetlejuice too.
It's not going to be in
Yeah.
Hawaii, I hope.
It's not going to be in Hawaii.
I really want to see Beetlejuice surfing.
But yeah, but I mean, that image aside, I mean, I think that there is a lot of interesting things to discuss there,
Right.
as far as horror movies go.
Well, let me ask you this. Where do you think horror movies are going at their current point? Where do you think we're going?
Honestly, I think it's just like any other franchise. Like, as you said, if you go deep into the Hollywood well, they're going to run them into the ground like anything else until it gets revitalized.
There's a resurgence
by
again, yeah.
some filmmaker or something happening that
agree.
just kind of brings it back to life.
Now you make a very good point, because we now are entering a time where we've got movies like Crimson Peak, for example, which have you guys heard of Crimson Peak?
I've seen the trailers.
Okay. Crimson Peak for me is a resurgence of the 1950s Victorian horror movie.
Okay.
Where we're now jumping back to Hammer Films.
Do you think
land.
it's going to be good?
I think it's going to be fantastic.
Sweet.
Because one, we know that Guillermo del Toro is a movie fan.
Yeah,
first
man.
and foremost, the man is
Yep.
a film auteur who cares about his movies. Even if you don't necessarily like them, you can look at movies like, I know not everyone liked Pacific Rim, where I love Pacific Rim, even though it's kind of like Rock'em Sock'em Robots. But you can tell that there's love behind making that type of movie.
Is that when you eat ass from a girl on the West Coast? Pacific Rim.
Pacific Rim? Have you not seen Pacific Rim?
No, I know what you're
He's
talking
just
about.
being an asshole.
He's just being an
It's
asshole.
fine.
But I mean, for me, the movies that I've seen that he's done, Pan's Labyrinth, even the Hellboy movies.
And there's a beautiful dichotomy to his films, I think, because they are visually gorgeous.
They
and
really
Crimson
are.
Peak looks gorgeous.
It does.
So for it to be frightening and beautiful at the same time, I think that's why Scream works for me, because it's funny and scary at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think sometimes you need the two sides of
Like
the coin.
like Sweet and Salty.
Yeah, for the whole thing to work.
Well, what are we trying to say here? That the film has to look gorgeous? Look at Night of the Living Dead. That film
Well, no,
is
not
certainly not
necessarily.
gorgeous, but it's a masterpiece.
I mean, but I think that there's beauty in the cinematography. Right. I think that there's something to be found there. I mean, I'm not saying for a movie to be scary, it also has to be beautiful. But do I think that's going to be a point to Crimson
Peak.
Peak's credit? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is a podcast of filmmakers, but I really don't think you have to be a filmmaker to say that it all boils down to the story.
Absolutely.
And if the story is good,
and you have to care about the characters.
But
I'm just saying, from a visual standpoint, I think that there's things that certain filmmakers, like I said, like Guillermo del Toro, like that he does well, that make him successful. Absolutely.
For me, it's just a matter of seeing. I mean, because I've seen this happen with independent filmmakers. For example, my really good friend Fred Vogel of Toe Tag Productions. If you were aware of Toe Tag Productions, he makes movies that honestly they kind of range the gauntlet now. But his earlier films were very much like the August Underground series. They were kind of the snuff film type thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he built his base on. But he started to branch out from that and make more narrative-based work, like Red Sin Tower, for example. But the care that he takes, for example, I know the last time I talked to him, he was telling me about a movie idea of his called Pittsburgh Body Removers, in which he had actually gone basically on a ride-along with real-life Pittsburgh Body Removers.
which is a real job.
So, I mean, that's a real job of removing dead bodies.
Clean it up,
but that's kind of what the independent filmmaker has been doing this entire time that Hollywood's been crapping out, remakes and sequels and just the rehashing of the same old ideas when it comes to horror. Is the independent filmmaker has been getting into the shit and actually making things that have fantastic story, that have characters that you care about, that are visually pleasing, even if it's like Night of Living Dead, where it's black and white and it maybe isn't the most visually appealing thing, but its story and its characters and its situation that it puts the audience in is bar none amazing. And I look at Guillermo del Toro taking from that and applying it to something that would be just a Hollywood horror movie. It's now something a bit more. It's got, I mean, he's even using, like I saw both trailers for it the other day, and he's using things. He's still using CGI to do a lot of his effects, but at the same time, it doesn't feel kind of like the Zack Snyder using CGI.
Yeah, it feels more immediate. It
feels more
realistic,
fluid. It feels
elemental.
more realistic.
Yep.
And it's getting back to a time when people cared about the characters in horror movies. People cared about the story structure, and people cared about it, scaring people and not just being a cash cow. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of
hopefully that's the case. I mean,
and I'm hoping that that's the direction we're going, because you look at that movie, you look at Babadook, for example, which scared the bejesus out of people. I mean, it kind of goes back to that whole creepy kids thing, but that's a movie that, again, cares about story, cares about the characters, and it's not just going after the quick buck. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, we talked about the audiences for certain things, just kind of as a wrap up. And I don't foresee this coming anytime soon. But as much as you can appeal to the lowest common denominator and people will go see it, I think if you challenge them, they will go see that too. So I mean, independent filmmaking, what we're doing, and all that is great, but it doesn't reach as much of a mass audience as Hollywood. So you would hope that in some way, while independent filmmaking can not only flourish, but also that Hollywood would actually kind of try to take a step back and make something of quality. Because if you challenge people, I think you'd actually be surprised and how, as much as they'll, if you give them the lowest common denominator, they'll go see that. If you give them something to challenge them, they'll go to see that too. So hopefully we can find some middle ground where a lot more independent film can be pushed into the mainstream, and then the mainstream will then possibly kind of respond and actually give us something of quality. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm kind of hoping that that's kind of the route we're going.
I think kind of the whole honestly that gets to a much larger conversation, and probably one that we can devote an entire episode to, and we probably will, to just distribution of independent films, and just kind of what's out there and where it's going, and basically how the past couple of years has become much easier to get your movie out there and not have to deal with the gatekeepers. You still have to deal with gatekeepers to some degree. I know I've had to experience that of my own with my own independent documentary, but it is easier than it was, say, 10 years ago.
Well, in true independent films, not movies that were made for $20 million.
Those aren't independent films. Movies, those really aren't. And honestly, that goes for any ones that enter Sundance, because Sundance, for me, that is just a, let's go have Fox Searchlight pictures come up, and that's an independent one.
Yeah, it was actually something of nobility, but it's just turned into studios putting their $20 million movies out there and saying, this is an independent movie.
Yeah, and we can do a whole show about that too, guys.
Yeah,
and it's not.
All right, so
I think we're going to close out this podcast.
Yeah, man. Good episode. Good job. Patting myself on the back.
Awesome.
Good job, guys.
I think we should finish it with, what's your favorite scary movie?
In fact,
truly terrifying.
If you want to, you can go ahead and... I'm going to do our ending plug.
Yeah, ending plug.
Yes.
Ending plug.
Go plug.
You can go ahead and find the show. Hopefully, we've got our Twitter set up by this time. We're kind of recording this without having the Twitter and the Facebook
guerrilla
set up.
style,
Going guerrilla style.
It doesn't take long to set up, though.
It doesn't, but I haven't done it yet.
We'll link everything in the show notes, right?
Yes, we'll link everything in the show notes. So you can go ahead and find us on Twitter. Hopefully, it hasn't taken at Cinema Psychos Show on Twitter and also on Facebook.
Yeah.
You can also find me, Brian Connington, on Facebook at Brian Connington, as well as Elaine Woolscroft and John Woolscroft on Facebook and Twitter. Are you guys on the Twitter?
Yeah, you can follow me at LA_Croft, and also that's my Super Serials handle.
That's your Super Serials handle.
I'm LA Croft over there, and you can follow the...
When does Super Serials come out?
We come out every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
And we are at Super Serials, also on the Twitter. We also have a Tumblr, and our Tumblr is awesome.
A Tumblr? Mm-hmm. Maybe we should look
for
at
the
Tumblr.
youths, dude. We gotta do it.
The youths?
Mm-hmm.
Two youths.
The youths.
I'm not even really sure what Tumblr does.
And you're not really on Twitter.
You're not on Twitter. You're not on the Twitter.
Deal with it.
Old man Woolscroft.
Deal with it. Not on Twitter.
But thanks so much.
Change.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Peace.